All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Friday, May 6th. We are at the end of our first week, and hopefully you've taken the opportunity to download all of the assignments and check out Wednesday's archive, and gotten a head start on your assignments. Downloaded and played our first game called 2D Platformer. We talked in depth about the setup and the musical approach for the soundtrack of that game. We talked that the game focuses really on the approach of intro music files, main loop music files, and ending files. So the game will randomly choose between 3 intros, 3 main loops, and 3 endings. And the intention is to make the composition feel like one full piece played from one band or the same group of musicians and instruments, and has a continuous feel as it kind of rises and falls. And then the main loops make up most of the soundtrack as each of those 8 bar loops rotate around. So we got into the game composition, but I also wanted to point out a few things from the production technique and the technical assignment. As you worked on those, though the technical assignment is based more from the game composition, so that it requires you to finish the game composition first before you do the technical assignment. It requires the use of all of the assets created from the game composition. But the production technique is separate, and it kind of goes through a couple of different approaches for looping music or looping game music. Sorry. Session setup here. So, hold on. If you're in the archive, my GoToMeeting just crashed for whatever fun reason. So let me be right back here. All right, we're back on the archive. I was discussing the production technique session, and there are a series of folders and folder tracks in this session, and we started out in part 1. And just double click on part 1 to open up that particular folder. And when you start, you will have the original track up here, and we're just going to make a copy of that down to the new track. All right, so the steps will detail the process of going through and creating 3 different loops. And those loops are going to be a low intensity loop, a medium intensity loop, and a high intensity loop. Now, looping music is extremely important in games because it allows you to, at least musically, stay in one spot and loop around and around as long as you need to before you transition and move on into the next part of the game or the next part of the story. So there's lots of different reasons that somebody might be stuck in one part of the game where they are solving a puzzle, or they are lost and exploring around and trying to find the next part of the story. So the music will go around. It can be a couple of bars long, it can be a couple of minutes long, however long the piece of music is going to be. Having it be able to loop so that when it reaches the end, it can seamlessly return back to the top of the file and play through again. You want this to be as invisible as possible, and it's a common technique to create music loops from previously existing music. So often when music is written for a game, it is done initially without the intention of where it's going to be and where it's going to end up. You don't know, you might compose an idea for a character or a theme or a location, and you build it and compose it as a linear piece of music. and you know eventually it's going to go somewhere in the game. You don't necessarily know how long it's going to need to be there, how long it's going to last, where it's going to start and end, but generally you write music that fits an emotion or fits danger or solving the puzzle or winning the game. So you compose a piece of music beforehand, and then at some point later on, you have to go back to it. And there's more of a game there. It's more well defined, and you can then say, okay, this previous piece of music that I had worked on, either you have the WAV files or you can go back into the original DAW session and you start editing it down and trimming it up so that it fits the 30 seconds that it needs to play in this part of the game, or the other part of the game where you just explore around and you find the new area, so it needs to loop infinitely over there. And you can trim up a piece of music to fit a particular area. So we're going to talk about how to just, we're going to start out with a real easy editing, just topping and tailing, finding the downbeat, finding the beginning of our 4 or 8 bars, and listen through to find the end of a particular musical rhythm or phrase, make that loop, and edit that down. So let's see. Let's make sure we can hear this, and that it doesn't crash again in a horrible fire. Let's see. The problem here is I can't hear anything. There we go. And let's do this. Take down the fader here. And let's listen to this. All right. I can hear that. Can you hear that? Can you hear the music? Can you still hear me? Let's move over here. Yeah, it's working. Excellent. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to the loop. We're going to listen to the music. This piece of music is highly rhythmic, so it should be pretty easy to find the downbeat, find the beginning of a loop, and you can use 4 bars or 8 bars. It's pretty well defined. I think there's some cymbal crashes that you can use pretty easily. All right, just like that. There's a downbeat. All right, so we're going to find the beginning of this cymbal crash. We're going to zoom way in and find the closest 0 crossing point, and we're going to split this file. Hit S to split, and we make our edit right at the beginning, right at the downbeat, and we'll listen for, let's see, for the next cymbal crash. I think it's 4 bars later. All right, there's another cymbal. So we're going to do the same thing. We find the end of the loop, find a 0 crossing point. Should kind of look the same at the beginning and the end, and split the file again. And this is our loop. We can turn on cycle. And as it loops around, we should hear no pops or clicks or gaps or anything. Should be pretty invisible overall. This should be nothing mind-blowing, nothing brand new. This is just a basic editing of a file, creating a loop. Hopefully you made a loop at some point. And if not, then you're going to cut 3 loops out of here. So then you'll just delete all the stuff around it. You'll keep the original one up here, have the loops down here, and you end up with 3 different loops for 3 different intensities. So over here you'll pull a loop for low intensity. Somewhere in here you'll do medium intensity. Over here it's high intensity. Right, you can pretty much use those cymbal crashes as a guidepost, find the beginning and the end of the loops, and cut them all out. All right, so let's back up again and go to part 2 here. In part 2, zoom back out here. Part 2 here has two sections of regions of MIDI. All right, we've got a 4-bar electronic loop. Sounds like this. Dropped out for some reason. We have an orchestral loop that kind of looks like this. So we are going to bounce these, and you've bounced MIDI before. You do that all the time whenever you deliver any of your sessions. And the problem with bouncing these files is that there is some instrumentation, some effects, delays and reverbs and things like that that overlap past the end of the region and cause trouble as the file loops around. So let me do this. Let me play this again. There's a cymbal crash at the end here. And that cymbal crash goes past the end and continues playing at the front. So if I stop it there, you hear that the rest of the cymbal crash, there's delay in there, there's reverb, there's all sorts of stuff bouncing around. And you kind of lose all of that whenever you bounce the file, if you just bounce it directly. So let me show you what happens when we bounce this. 16-bit 44.1. I'm going to add it back to the project. Start and end. Notice, right, my beginning and the end of the file is 193 and 197. And I bounce it. And I'm going to name this. Can I just name it electronic? No. Fine. Electronic 6. I've done this too many times. Okay. Then I go. Where's my mouse? Hello, mouse. Oh, it's all falling apart. My technology doesn't. Ooh, what happened to my screen? Oh, everything disappeared. Okay, I got my mouse back. There's Logic back. Here I'm. Where did I go? There I am. All right. Technology does not want to work with me this afternoon. Okay, so I bounced it, and I need a new audio track. This is an audio track, isn't it? Yes. Nope, not my library. What am I doing? My browser. Doing everything with a very small screen here makes it for lots of fun. Okay. Here's the file that I bounced. And actually, I bounced it with my fader down a little bit. But that's fine. All right. Let's mute these out. And let's listen to this. Now listen for that cymbal crash at the end. The cymbal crash gets cut off every single time. And you don't hear it, or the beginning, the tail of that cymbal is not heard overlapping back to the front of the file like it did in the original MIDI. So let's fix this here. Let's bounce this out correctly so that it actually maintains everything whenever we do the bounce. You can't see my logic session. Why? Oh, you're showing the wrong screen. Man. How's that? You got to see my other screen there. Is that better? Thank you. Fun. So, what we are going to do now is take all of this information and double it up and highlight both of these and bounce this out. And by bouncing this out, we're going to basically double the length of everything. Let me bring that back up. And let me bounce it one more time. Pull that back in. Now, while it's twice as long, so all we're going to do here is split this in half and only use the second half of this and get rid of the first half. Now, when we listen to this, the part that was over here previously, you will actually hear the beginning of that cymbal crash at the beginning of this file. This time, when it loops around, that cymbal crash maintains and creates a seamless loop. So this works for any instrumentation that kind of overlaps the end of your loop. That would be reverb tails, cymbal crashes, instrument decay. And it'd always make a seamless loop instead of just bouncing it directly. So again, all I'm doing here is I take all the information, all the MIDI that I want to bounce, and I duplicate the length. I set my region or my marquee here to 8 bars. I bounce it, 8 bars long. I chop it in half and delete the first half, and that leaves only the second part. And this part will contain everything from the beginning of the file. When it loops back around, it'll catch everything back up. You'll do that same process over here. You'll split out all of the different instruments into different stems while bouncing. And then this third part here. Oops. So part 1 was basic editing of the files, topping and tailing the files. Part 2 is bouncing MIDI information to make sure that you maintain seamless loops going from MIDI to audio. And part 3 is making things loop that don't otherwise easily loop. So here we have 2 regions. We're going to end up making 2 loops. And these are just interesting tones, synth pads. There's a lot of pitch change in there and a lot of modulation. And it becomes kind of difficult to make these things loop. This would maybe be a good synth bed for an ambient cue or for an environment or an ambience or anything like that. So let's say we want to make these loop pretty easily, and you could obviously come in here and chop off the beginning and chop off the end, and you could try to make this loop, and you could probably sit there for quite a while and get pretty close to making everything loop properly, but it takes quite a lot of time. Right, we hear there's a a big jump in the pitch and the timbre and the volume and all of the different changes in this cue. So it makes it obvious when it loops around. So we want to be able to make seamless loops pretty quickly and easily. So again, I'm just going to take this region and drag it down to the next, to the edit track so that I don't mess with the original. And the thing to notice here is as I edit, I'm doing it pretty quickly and I'm doing it pretty blindly where I don't actually listen to where I'm making the edits. Now, of course, in a true situation, you would probably have much more intention and you would be paying attention to where the loop would be, where you wanted it to start and end. But just to show the process, shows how quick and easy you can create pretty perfect loops. All right, so all we're going to do is chop out a section that we're going to make loop. And we'll start with a pretty big section so that we can chop it down even more. So I will split there, and I will split there, and I'll just get rid of these sections. Then we're going to make this part loop, and all we have to do is split the file in half and take the left part, and we're going to drag it over the right. We're not going to drag it over all the way over here, but we're actually going to overlap it a little bit. Doesn't really matter where you overlap, but get a pretty solid chunk between the two. And at this point, you have a perfect loop at the end of the regions, right? The edge of this seamlessly connects to the end of this seamlessly connects back to the beginning of this file. And the reason that's the case is because it used to actually be part of the same file. So we just chop it and flip, and now the outside edges are perfect. We can do this. And here, when it loops around, it is always seamless. The problem is this big chunk in the middle here. Looks like I did pretty good. There's still a little bit of a change there, but that was just by luck. Really what you need to do here is use the fade tool. Just do a big crossfade across the middle, and it's going to seamlessly crossfade between those two bad edits. And now the loop always works. Beginning and the end, turn on the loop. And that could just go on and on and on forever and just be an ambient element to your sound effects or to your music. So again, all I did here was I just chopped it out, just chopped a section out, pretty big, so I can slice it in half again. Slice it in half, take the left side, move it past or over the right side, go to my fade tool, and do a crossfade. And it always works. All right, so this is how you make different types of loops, different approaches to creating loops, editing the files, bouncing out MIDI to make sure it stays a seamless loop, and editing things that don't easily loop. One thing to point out here is that this does not work with rhythmic material. With drum loops or patterns or anything, you would just totally destroy the rhythm here. This only works for synths and pads and drones and things that are ambient kind of feel to them. Ambiances. When you have to do hundreds of different areas in a map, and it's a whole bunch of exciting wind gusts and series of bird tweets and just like leaves rustling around. You don't want to, it'll put you to sleep doing, you have to do hundreds of those. So you don't want to take a whole bunch of time or need to make them perfectly perfect. You can knock a whole bunch of them out, and they'll always just constantly loop. It's more about how long do you want them to be. Otherwise, the beginnings and ends don't matter as much. So, I mean, there's certain times when every little detail matters, but for the most time, you can do that pretty quickly. All right, so the other thing that I wanted to point out, do I need this? No. Is your technical assignment. And again, where did that go? Let's do this. This is the grade sheet. You get the grade sheets when you download everything, just to show you how everything will be graded and the things that you need to be paying attention to. So, for this one, you will be delivering all of your 9 game composition music files. You'll be delivering them in multiple different formats. So, this requires you, again, it requires you to finish the game composition first. And with the game composition, you'll be bouncing everything out at 16-bit 44.1 stereo files, right? Pretty standard, normal sample rate. That'll work well for game consoles and PC and Mac and just more of the larger systems. But whenever you create music for a game, it often needs to exist in multiple forms because they're going to also build a website, and they're going to do a mobile game, and they're going to do iOS game, an Android game, and multiple different formats. So you have to be able to deliver the audio files in multiple different formats. Also, so we are going to deliver your 9 wave files in 16-bit 22K stereo wave files and 8-bit 22K mono core audio files. And this assignment is really about all the details to make sure that across all of the 9 files you have everything spelled correctly, the correct number of channels, which is mono or stereo, that it's at the correct sample rate, 22K, the correct bit depth of either 16-bit or 8-bit. File format is WAV or core audio files. Core audio files are the main format. It's like a proprietary format from Apple. All of your logic loops are in core audio files. It is a compressed file format, sort of, kind of, but not really like MP3s, only in as much as that it reduces the overall file size. It's not as big as a full uncompressed WAV file. That allows it to take up smaller file size on a disk or a download or something like that. But it is compressed, which means it's not just the raw ones and zeros. It has to be converted into something that you can actually hear, just like an MP3. So the core audio files, there's actually a chip in iPhones and iPads that will, and Mac computers, that will convert the audio file very, very quickly so that it plays back almost instantly. So it's very common file format for games on an iOS device, and we can bounce those easily out of Logic. So those core audio files are 8-bit 22K mono files. So let me just do a quick rundown on how to properly bounce these files. Some of it is just bouncing files, and it's not really all that challenging except for paying attention to all the details. But there is one more specific element dealing with mono and stereo files and bouncing the correct number of channels out of Logic that kind of gets a little tricky here. So let's create a file. I think actually I don't want to do that. I want a software instrument track. So give me one of those. And okay. Let's say this was my awesome piece of music. This is my region that I want to download. that I want to bounce. So we said that we have to bounce these in. Oh, where did that go? Oh, there we go. 16-bit 22K stereo files, stereo wave files. So we'll go here and we will bounce this file, and we will do 16-bit 22K wave file, and it is stereo. We have two stereo formats, split and interleaved. You want an interleaved file, which is just a regular old stereo file. And we hit OK, and we name it properly, and we save it to a location where you know where it is so you can deliver it. And that's just regular old bouncing files. Then just changing to the correct sample rate. So that should be certainly nothing that's anything brand new or challenging. So the next part here is bouncing out a mono core audio file. So we have to do now 8-bit 22K mono core audio files. So still not all that different. We go to the bounce menu, and we want to do a core audio file, so CAF. We want an 8-bit bit depth. Sample rate's going to be 22K, and we want a mono file. So the file type allows for split and interleaved. Both of these are stereo file formats. And we could probably cheat a little bit and go to split, and then it gives you two files, a .l and .r. Both of them are mono, and you could just delete the right side, the .r file, and use the left file, but that's not really a mono mix. It's just the left-hand side of a stereo file, which is very different overall. So you do not want to use a split file here. You want to use a mono file. Well, the problem is it doesn't give you the choice of mono at this point. So the first thing to notice here is you do not want to use this bounce menu. Do not go to File Bounce up here in the top left-hand corner and just bounce the file out normally. There's a couple of things that you have to do in order to bounce something out as a mono file. First off, it's coming out of your stereo output, so you need to change the stereo output to a mono output. You could do that from the channel mode button right here. And you click that, and it goes from stereo to mono. Notice like you lose your pan because it's a mono file, or a mono bus, mono output. Your meter here goes from stereo to mono, and it doesn't actually change the name for you, but you have a mono output at this point. So now you think you're ready to go, so you go back to bounce and you go back to file type, but you still only have split and interleaved. So again, do not use file bounce to bounce this out. And I have a little issue with this because there's actually multiple bounce menus in Logic. You would think that you just bounce is the same bounce no matter how you want to do it, but you actually want to use this BNCE button down here directly off of your output channel. And when you do this, you hit bounce, you go to core audio file, 8-bit, 44.1. Actually, we want that to be 22K. And we're ready to go. Now you go to file type. There is no stereo. It's only mono. Well, it's a grayed out, actually. You don't have a choice at all. So this gives you your mono output. You hit OK, and you can actually bounce out your files. And you name it, and you should always double check your files. Make sure that you don't trust how you bounce out your files. Don't think that you just bounce them and they're all perfect and you got it every single time. Let me show you how I actually grade this, and you should go through this same process to make sure your files are set up correctly. Let me get an example here. So what am I doing? Section Week 1 technical assignment. All right, when you deliver this assignment, you will have two folders here, core audio files and wave files. These wave files, you can hold down, what is it? Well, let me just do it this way. Right click and do Get Info. Apple I will bring up this screen, and you can see that it's sample rate, the bit depth, and the number of channels. That's how I go through and grade all of these. If you actually hit Command Option I, it opens one up, and you can jump from file to file. So I do this, and I look at each one of the files. And I'm just checking the sample rate and the bit depth, and if it never changes, and if it's correct. All right. These are 22K 8-bit mono files. And I'm also checking, I look at the file names. These are actually, they need to have a 0 in front of all of them. But that is how you double check your files. Again, all I'm doing is right clicking and I choose Get Info. Just do that on each one of your files. So, I think that will catch us up with our production technique for week 1 and our technical assignment. Will get us into the actual material that we're going to discuss. Our topics for this afternoon are going to be a discussion of the industry as a whole, and the role of a game composer in that industry. A lot about jobs and working as freelance and working in-house. Different kind of the different chain of command that can happen in a typical game company. Actually, it's really on the largest end, so we talk about all the different jobs that are available. But like, who do you work for? Who hires you? Who signs your paychecks? And who has creative control? And all of those kind of aspects of working as a freelance music composer on a game. So before we start here, I'm going to take a quick pause. But let's see. Our first topic here: why game music, and makes a reference to some of your text. Hold on just a sec. All right. So we'll start with the money. That's always a good place to start. Found more success overall in the game industry, and this is pulled from your text book that hopefully you have received from Winifred Phillips, A Composer's Guide to Game Music. According to Reuters, video games were a $78 billion industry in 2012, and only has been growing since that time. The industries as a whole, the game industry has been outpacing the music industry and the movie industry of recent years, because has had all sorts of sources of revenue, whether it is console games or like online digital distribution of games, sort of like the App Store or iTunes. Certainly not games through iTunes, but of that same model. There's a store out there called Steam that allows you to buy games online for your Mac and PC. There's a number of websites that you can buy games for digital download. And then you get into the consoles themselves and downloadable content and subscription games, and there's all sorts of different ways that games have been successful over time. And so there's a very good resource out there called the Game Audio Survey, the Game SoundCon Game Audio Industry Salary Survey. And let's see if this opens up here. I'll go search for it. If you go online and type in Game Sound Con, Game Sound Con is a conference started by Brian Schmidt, and he is the former head of audio at Microsoft during the time. Hello, Game Sound Con. There it is. During the time of Xbox and the Xbox 360. He was kind of the head of audio and is a very well-known figure in the game, audio, and music industry. So he left Microsoft and has since started the Game Sound Conference, which is out in Los Angeles, and has a whole bunch of audio minds meeting and talking about all sorts of audio topics. And one of the things that they have done is put together this game audio salary survey, and they send out a anonymous survey. Let's go to 15. Is it loading? They send out an anonymous survey that audio industry type folks will talk about their overall compensation in the industry, how much they're getting paid, how long they've been working in the industry, the different types. Well, okay. We'll just go for 2014. It's still gives some of the same information. And it is a really good resource to talk about the numbers and what people are making and how they're making it, and just give you a sense of the industry as a whole. So some of the things out here. Average annual salary for people that have been in the industry for quite a while. Also, the 2014 numbers are a little more skewed than the 2015. There are a lot more people participated in 2015, so some better numbers overall. But it gives you ideas of per project, work for hire, buyout situation. Most of the music in games is in a buyout situation where they want to buy the composition out entirely so that it doesn't appear anyplace else, and they can use it in all of the forms of media that they need to apply it to. They have the game, then they have the sequel to the game, they have downloadable content, they have a mobile game, they have advertising, and they use it in all of its different forms. And instead of paying you residuals on each one of those different ones, or some royalty rate for each one of those, then they'll just create a full project buyout for each of those. Ideas about a indie or casual game, the overall project fee. Now, this is the project, not necessarily what goes directly into your pocket, but you get to see the range and how many people responded in those ranges. Let's see. Game audio professionals are predominantly freelance. Most game composers also deliver sound effects. At least some integration is done by composers. This is working with the actual tools like Fmod and Wise and the game engine, and actually getting into the engine and setting up how the music works. Per unit royalties are very rare for big titles. Soundtracks clauses remain rare but more common in smaller games. If a game company doesn't have enough money to pay you up front, then they might, or you might be able to retain the rights to the soundtrack and sell it for an extra source of revenue. So there's just all sorts of good information about the industry overall, and definitely a great resource to check out when kind of getting started and kind of getting an idea of what the industry is and the direction that you might head. So I think I talk about some of this stuff. Average salary for the employee. Average AAA project fee. AAA projects are the big budget games that you see millions of dollars are spent on them. and big advertising budgets and all involves. Now, this is just the average size, I guess, not the biggest of the big. Per project for an indie casual game, typically more of the range that you'll start out at. Game music is work for hire. 2% of composers received payments based on unit sales. Yeah, typically you don't get a royalty per unit sold. It is maybe milestones or sales goals, where you get, hey, we sold 100,000 copies, or we sold 1,000,000 copies, or whatever it is. Then you get an X amount of more money overall. There's a great video from Brian Schmidt. It's available in the suggested viewing material for this week, and it's the introduction to game audio. And he's just talking overall about the industry, and really a lot of times from the point of view of a musician, a composer, sound designer that has worked in film or television or some other media that wants to transition over into games. And is talking about what's the same and what is different between those different media. And one of the questions that he brings up that he's asked is, why are films easy and games hard? And certainly films are not easy overall, but games present a challenge on their own of this layer of interactivity, and it speaks to a couple of the points that are made. Film sound is in a linear format and has well-established film industry that has roots back to the 1830s, or back pretty long ago, certainly in technology terms. Game sound is nonlinear and breaking new ground. Game industry has roots back to the 50s. And games, yes, people were playing primitive games on their oscilloscopes back in the 50s, but what we know as video games today could have the start in like the late 70s and 80s, and we got home gaming consoles through the 90s, and then more of what we would consider modern gaming, like mobile gaming and all those sorts of things, more towards in the past 20 years or so. So when that's compared to film that has a history and an industry over 100 years, it's makes for a lot more experience and trial and error and different technology over time that the film industry has benefited from. Film sound is linear, meaning that every single time you rewind back, you know exactly what's going to happen. But game sound is not. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, and game industry is breaking new ground. There's, there's certainly new technology in film and new techniques and all sorts of stuff, but it's really just kind of the beginning parts of the industry overall, and really pushes technology and the capabilities, and you have that extra layer of interactivity in games that presents new challenges. So, some other ideas here. Basically any aspect that interests you in the music industry or the audio industry, all of that stuff is available in games too. Everything that about music and recording and production and sounds and audio and recording and mixing, and there's all sorts of fun stuff available for games. So, of course, music composition, this is where we're at. This is really what we're mostly focused on throughout the month. But also music licensing. If you're interested in working with the artists and acquiring the rights and the license, working with their record labels, their lawyers and their management teams to acquire more of the business side, acquire their masters to their recordings so that they can be used for a game. Think about a game like Grand Theft Auto that has an entirely licensed music soundtrack, or music games like singing games and dancing games, and a Guitar Hero or Rock Band, where the game is the music itself, and they have to get access to the individual tracks and master recordings. Studio recording and editing and mixing. If you are interested in living the life in the studio, you want to own a studio, you want to be a studio engineer, a lot of studios are finding gaming clients for recording long dialogue scripts, Foley, band recording. Uh, Lots of game studios are not equipped with an in-house recording studio. It takes a lot of money and investment and construction involved, and to make a audio isolated studio so that you don't blast and annoy everybody else, and everybody else walking down the hallways doesn't get into your recording. So studios have found gaming clients and game companies need their recording spaces. Sound design, there's probably even more opportunity in sound design for games than just music. And that's mostly a question of, or a fact of numbers, where there's typically one game composer on a project. There can easily be one or two or three or five or 10 sound designers because of the huge need for sounds, just lots of different variety of stuff, all of the weapons and vehicles and levels and ambiences and characters and monsters and all sorts of stuff. Everything needs fun sound design involved with that also. So if you can do both music and create sound effects, makes you even more valuable overall, and then they don't have to pay two people. They can give you all of the money. On location and field recording, there's also possibilities of, if you don't like the studio, you want to be outside in the sunlight and sunshine, you can go out and record libraries for companies. Game companies need custom weapons and vehicle libraries built, and they don't want their sounds to sound like any other game out there, so they get access to custom libraries built by field recordists to fill out their game. Implementation is the process of actually getting your music working in the game. It's sort of the technical approach of taking the WAV files and hooking them in with the game software to make them function and play back correctly. I kind of relate this in a very loose way to an audio mixer or a mixing engineer on an album, where they take all of the individual tracks and edit them and format them and mix them and apply effects. And basically, they're in charge of a lot of technology to properly render the final version of the music that you hear. Implementation is in a very loose way. It's not just mixing, although mixing is an element of it, but it's setting it up and making sure it plays back the right file at the right time and loops the files correctly and mixes the files correctly and adds reverbs and effects and pans them in real time and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of the technical aspects of how it plays back. And why else music for games? Well, there's playing games for a living, which is sometimes very good and sometimes very bad. Number one, it's playing games for a living. So if you enjoy playing video games, then it's certainly a good place to be, and it's certainly a necessity to keep up on the industry. But you're not necessarily, when working, playing on games just for fun. It's playing the same game, the same broken game over and over and over again before it's sent out to the general public. And by the time it's finished and everybody else hears it, might be even sick of listening to it over and over and over again. But that happens on a lot. That happens on a music album. That happens on a film project. But if you don't enjoy what you're doing during the process, it makes it all the more painful all the way through. All right. So the next topic here, what makes a successful game composer? Let me take a quick pause before we get into this. Hold on. All right. So, some overall skills and traits that will make a successful game composer. Some things to be aware of. So, what makes a successful game composer? Well, certainly a love for video games is a good place to start. You need to be paying attention to the industry and playing video games and keeping up with them, although this can be a challenge, certainly. I have a long, long list of games that I own but have not played yet or have not played all the way through. I find the most fun game that I play is the one that I'm working on currently, whatever one that is. So I do so much making games or making audio for games that sitting back and spending hours at a time, along with, like family and friends and having a life and stuff like that. That certainly is enjoyable and time rewarding also. But we got to make sure we keep up with the industry and keep up with what's going on. Same thing with the music industry and the film industry. You have to be watching movies and paying attention to the newest and latest films and what's going on, how they created those films, and paying attention to the music industry and who the latest artists are and what's popular and how did they produce those music and the business behind it all. And so it just so happens we're talking about video games. So being able to keep up with the industry, because clients really speak in terms of the industry and in terms of previous projects. Musicians and producers speak in terms of previous albums. Film producers and directors speak in terms of previous films, and game developers speak in terms of previous games. So having that language of film and music in games will certainly help you keep up the conversation when dealing with clients. Unafraid of creative and technical challenges. Certainly that is a part of being a sort of digital musician, having to live your work inside of your computer, deal with the computer, dealing with the internet and online presence, and being able to communicate and network with clients online. There's certainly technical challenges in all of that, but you should not be afraid of those challenges. And the game industry certainly adds on to all of that. Because when working on a game, you are working on a broken game for months or years on end. It's not a finished, complete product or project. It's not even when it's released out to the public, it's not even complete, totally complete. There's still bugs and fixes. They always update games and change stuff. So being able to go with the flow when things crash and error and having issues, and it's like a puzzle, and being able to work through that puzzle adds another sense of satisfaction to the whole process. So being not intimidated by the technology, because there's always new stuff, and that kind of rolls into a desire for involvement into a new art form. Games are sort of a new frontier. They're constantly changing. The technology is still just in its infancy of where it's all going. Certainly a while ago they said, hey, we invented these huge machines and we'll put them in our arcades and everybody will throw quarters into our arcade machines. And then they said, well, now we're going to have them in home consoles and everybody can play at home. And music and sound went from simple waveforms, bleeps and bloops, and into recorded audio. And they said, oh, now we can record everything, and it sounds like a full orchestra or a recorded band. And then now we invented the internet. That's not really what happened, but hey, now the internet's here, and we can play games online, and we can play multiplayer games. So now we have to invent new ways to have multiplayer experiences. Not only having what's on my computer, but it's also on everybody else's computer across the internet. And then, hey, we invented mobile devices. Now your game and your music is going to be on this small little device. And The next seems to be virtual reality. Here, put on this helmet, this headset, and these earphones, and go play in this other world. So these are all new challenges, new ways, and new approaches. It's sort of like going from silent pictures to recorded sound to television to HD and wherever things are going, and surround sound and all. It's just new forms and new ways and approaches to your music and sound. So the technology is constantly changing. There's all sorts of new fun stuff that's invented. So being on the edge of where the music is going and how it's experienced is certainly a fun place to be. A passion for composition. This should be the best place and the place that you most would like to spend your days. Well, there's certainly things beyond this, but basically, this is where you are going to spend most of your life in as a musician and as a composer, is actually composing music and making music. All of the stuff that you've been learning throughout this entire degree program, all of the theory, the production, the software, the instrumentation, the orchestration, understanding how the production process and the composition process goes, all of that is the fun and easy part in the job. It is where you should love to be and be most comfortable at. If you had all the money in the world, you should still want to make music. If you had no money in the world, you would still want to be making music. So this is because it presents its own challenges, and there's so many other things wrapped in to the process of being a successful composer. That if you don't feel comfortable when you sit down and start writing music, it becomes just way more laborious and much more like work. So having a passion for the actual composition process is key in all of that. Team member. Working on a game, just like working on a film, it is a team sport. It is working together with other creative individuals who tell you your work is good or your work is bad, and you need, well, not necessarily bad, but needs improvement, needs revision. You have to be able to take critique and feedback well and use it to better your work overall, not take offense to it. Also, you do not have creative control. You are serving the direction and the intention of a client. So some artists and musicians can't do that. It's their music, and nobody's going to tell them otherwise, and you can't pay them enough to write their music any other way. So you need to be able to take the intentions of a client, and often that client does not know what the heck they're talking about, at least in a strong musical terms. They know what they want, and they're completely correct in their creative direction, but how to actually tell you that and express that in words that make any sort of sense. A lot of clients don't know what they want, but they know what they like when they hear it. So that means trial and error, and most of the time, whenever I send a new piece of music off to the client or some new sound or new part of the game, I pretty much know they're going to deny it, and they're not going to not necessarily that they don't like it, but it inspires more ideas and more direction overall, more feedback and more critique. They'll say, yes, I like this part, but I don't like that part. And it's a lot of times it's like, oh, that's what you mean. Well, why didn't you say that the first time? Okay, I can definitely do that. Let's go in this direction. But clients may not be able to tell you that, but they can point to it and go, oh, yes, that. I like more of that. Okay, we'll head that direction. So being a helpful team member, which means not flaking out on people or rolling with the punches when they do flake out on you, and being there and present and on time and under budget and under deadline and all that stuff to be successful, because everybody else is human, right? And people procrastinate, and people get frustrated and get tired and have attitudes and all that stuff. But if you can work or somebody that is easy to work with, you're going to get a whole lot more work overall. And probably the last one here is probably the most important, or what really makes a successful game composer. A lot of other of those is what makes you a good game composer, but what actually makes you successful, that you can keep the lights on and keep the family fed and keep going with all of this stuff, is being a good small business owner. Being able to take care of all of the business aspects along with the music. Not only do you make good music, right? That's kind of understood. That's kind of expected overall. But being able to make really good music, the next thing is you need to be fast and efficient at it. Like I said, everybody is slow and procrastinates and is lazy, and they'll call you and say, "Hey, we need this in the next 24 hours, or we need this in the next week, or we need all this music in the next week. Can you pull all of that stuff off?" Well, if you're not only really good at it, but you're fast and efficient at it, makes you even more successful, and you're going to keep getting those phone calls. Then you have to be somebody that's good to work with, that keeps their promises and keeps their deadlines, and makes sure to make the client look good. And then on top of that, you have to be successful with all of the business side of things. Which means you have to you have to focus on the contracts, the legal aspects, making sure you get paid, and making sure you pay all your bills, and all of the fun things like taxes and insurances and savings and all of those fun things. So what will typically happen is early on, nobody knows who you are, nobody's going to hire you, and you have to kind of prove yourself and get a couple of credits and under your belt, and maybe you work on some things just for demo purposes. Certainly, if nobody else is hiring you, you should be working for yourself, which means you should be working on projects and building up your credits and portfolio and demo reel. I never felt really comfortable charging people for skills that I hadn't been done before. So I went out there and found game projects. Especially with games, you can find all sorts of free games that you can work with, and get some demo videos together, get a website and a portfolio reel, and have something to show off for it. And so in the beginning, you work really hard to find the clients, and then you start convincing some people to actually pay you for your work. And you have to, in the earlier stages, you typically screw yourself over and maybe not charge enough. You get the wonderful like feast and famine, where every once in a while you get these really nice paychecks, but they have to last for months on end to get to the next project. You have to be able to, if you're working, you also have to be able to find new clients, because your deadlines will come and you're all done with the project, and you look around, you haven't been talking to anybody for the past couple of months. You got to find new clients. So dealing with getting paid and the legal aspects and all of keeping your business together really becomes a challenge, because eventually the opposite happens. Then you start getting some clients, you start getting some projects under your belt, and then all of a sudden everybody starts calling you, and you have too much work, and it's only you working on it. And you have to say, well, I can't work on this. You have to deny one piece of work because you have to finish out another piece of work. And you have the opposite problem. And being able to balance all of that along with your life and your family and everything involved, that really becomes most of the challenge overall. Going back to composition, being in front of your DAW, writing music should be the peaceful, easy part and make you very happy. It's all of the other aspects that really become the challenge, and are why good music composers aren't always necessarily the successful game composers or successful music composers, because there's layers involved in all of that, in a lot of balance. So let's talk about jobs, specific job roles, and what we're going to talk about here is we're going to start with why did it get really small? I Hello. Do what you're going to do. There you go. We're going to start with in-house and freelance. In-house is basically the two paths that you can enter the industry, whether you go work for a company and you go move to their area, work in their offices directly with the game team, or you work freelance and you find clients and you work out of your home studio and you work on multiple different projects. So in-house, there are not very many jobs out there for a music composer in-house. Music composition for games is mostly a freelance role per contract, just in the same way as a film composer. Film composer isn't hired by the movie studio full-time. They are hired per project, and they freelance, and that allows them to work on multiple different movies, multiple different projects. So in-house is when you go and are hired directly. There's a little more opportunity in sound design, but there are certainly companies out there that have on staff game composers. You go work in-house. You are working directly with the development team, and so it's certainly a benefit. And probably the main benefit is that your employer is your client, and all you do is you go to work and you make music and you make sound. You don't have to chase clients. You don't have to deal with the business side of everything. You just are worried about the creative aspects of making all of the music. Sometimes there's annual benefits, stock options, project benefits of sales goals. If they hit a certain number, you can share. Or there's some sort of benefits packages overall. They also take care of health and retirement. There's often like 401ks and all sorts of a benefit package that makes it really nice to work in-house. But most of the work out there is freelance, and that is, you actually get paid more money as a freelance game composer. And you get to set your own hours, and you get to work on the projects that you want to work on, and you get to work out of your own home studio, and those aspects, you get to charge what you want. The problem with all of that is you get to work your own hours, which often means you're working double the hours of everybody else to make it all happen. You work out of your home office, which actually means you don't see humans for a week on end because you haven't left your house because you're working on something. Or you set your own rate, but what you're actually doing is bidding in a budget war back and forth with multiple different contractors, and you're hoping to get the main bid that you offered. So there's certainly back and forth. You get paid more overall because the company, the client doesn't have to cover benefits or retirement or 401k or medical or any of that stuff. You have to deal with all that. You also bring your studio to the deal. One of the big reasons that music is in a freelance role is that game studios can't build a music studio, or game companies can't build a music studio in their offices. So you bring your gear, your computer, your instruments, your recording space, your speakers, all of that stuff is in your home studio, and that probably over time costs many thousands of dollars to build up, and they don't want to have to drop $20 to $50 to $100,000 to build a studio inside of their own offices. So there's lots of benefits for a freelance game composer. You can work on multiple different projects. What happens in-house is somebody sticks their head up and they're like, oh, I've been working on the same game for the past 2 years. I have no idea what's been going on out in the real world. You get to work on a variety of things. It often becomes some interesting, cool projects. But you have to deal with all the fun stuff like taxes. You incorporate yourself as an LLC or an S Corp so that you get the tax benefits of being able to write off all of your entertainment and write off all your games. And hey, I need to buy a PlayStation 4. I can just write it off my taxes at the end of the year. Networking is an extremely important component of freelance work. You got to keep up and find clients. So networking at something like the Game Developers Conference is always beneficial. So our next topic here is developers and publishers. And these are concepts, I keep dropping my pen, sorry. These are terminology that I will refer to over and over again. And when we talk about developers and publishers, let's relate it over to the music industry. It's kind of like saying publishers are like the record labels, and developers can be thought of like the artist or the band or the artist production team, like the artists, the producers, the recording, mixing engineers, everybody that's involved in actually making the album. So hold on, let me take a quick pause before we get into this. All right. As a quick note here, it is, according to my clock, it is 4:57, and I do know that I put the time for the class from 3:30 to 5, but sometimes I do go over. I probably try to wrap it up by 5:30, or at least within the next half hour. And sometimes that happens on our Wednesday classes where we're doing the live feedback and we're listening to everybody's music. And if we have a lot of people, then it takes a little bit of time. So if you have to go, that's perfectly fine. But if you have to catch it on the archive, that's also good. But I'll just keep going until we get everything wrapped up. So just wanted to throw that out there. All right, publishers versus developers. Again, publishers can be thought of sort of like the record label. Game developers can be thought of more like the artist, the band, the production team around them. So game publishers provide the money and the deadlines for the project. So a game developer has an awesome idea for a game. They go to a publisher and they say, hey, we need millions of dollars to hire a whole bunch of people, and we need to buy all this technology, and we're going to make this awesome game. And the game publishers say, yes, okay, well, you've made us millions of dollars off of your previous awesome game, so here's a couple more million, and go make us another awesome game, and in the next 6 months or by Christmas time, we're going to need to release this game. And the game developers take all of that money, and they go hire everybody, and they hire you as the music composer. So you work for the game developers. Some game publishers are game developers also, right? Like the big ones, Activision, Electronic Arts, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo. They are publishers, and they also have companies below them, right? So, and actually all these publishers have developers. EA, Take-Two with Rockstar Games, Ubisoft, Valve has Steam. Who else? Microsoft did have Lionhead Studios. They made Fable, but Lionhead Studios closed. So, different publishers, different developers. So the developers hire everybody. They go make the game, and then they turn the game back into the publisher, and the publisher worries about marketing, advertising. They also mass produce it. They'll put it on, they'll do distribution of physical game discs. They'll put it in a box and put it in GameStop and Best Buy and Walmart all over the place. And they'll put it online and sell it to everybody through the internet. And everybody makes a whole bunch of money. Game publishers make all the money, and they give a large portion of it to the game developers, and everybody's happy. And they keep going. So very similar in the idea of how a record label and artists work together. The audio management team. Now we're going to talk about individual jobs. These are kind of the chain of command, different jobs that you would see at different game companies. You will not see all of these jobs at one company because every game company has like different structure and different corporate structure. But if you looked at a lot of different game companies, you would see these jobs. So starting out, the other thing to point out is at the big companies, you will have lots of individual jobs with individual people working those jobs. At the smaller game companies, especially with the game teams that you'll probably start out with, there'll be like a small group of people, one person, 5 people, 10 people, that wear a whole bunch of different hats. And they do lots of different game roles, like job roles. And it all depends. So all of these different game jobs are kind of like on the biggest scale of everything, where they just have tons of money and huge investment into these games. So an audio director is typically at a game developer or can be at a publisher where there are multiple different games being developed at the same time. So a game director or an audio director oversees all of the audio for multiple different games. They're in charge of making sure that game has all the resources that it needs, the money and the schedule and the people that it needs to hire. Now, the audio director doesn't hire them directly, but they say, okay, this team needs this many people and it needs this amount of budget and this deadline to finish the project. They don't really get their hands dirty too much in the actual creation of the content, but they're making sure that they have all of the resources needed to get the job done. The audio lead is the one person in charge of that one game project. So they are the main point person, the head of only one of the games. So, for example, EA Sports here in Orlando, or we have Tiburon, which is a game developer. The publisher is Electronic Arts. And they work on Madden and PGA Tour and NCAA. Well, they don't work on NCAA anymore. NBA and some FIFA and some Need for Speed and all of these different sports games. So there's an audio director that oversees all of them, and they're actually up in Vancouver in MediaWorks. So it's like Electronic Arts is across the world. So the audio lead is the main one point person in charge of all the audio. So there is one audio lead for Madden, there's one for NBA, there's one for PGA, there are all the different games. The audio lead is typically the person who hires you, and you will have direct contact with. That audio typically has creative control. They sign the paychecks or tell billing to send you money or whatever. They sign the contracts and get everything set up in deadlines and money, and they are maybe one of your direct contacts for working on the project. So they take the schedules, they take the money, and they make it happen to build. And they're ultimately responsible for how the game sounds. A music manager, if the game is large enough that it requires a wide variety of music, not necessarily like style, but if your game requires like a lot of big orchestral recording sessions, if it requires licensing popular music from a lot of different sources, a music manager might be necessary. A music manager is almost like a producer for a project, where they make sure the studios are there, the artists and musicians are there, the engineers are there, the time and the place and the money is all taken care of, so that all the composer has to do is compose. And this is typically on the larger scale projects overall. A good example of this is we have Jonathan Mayer, who is a graduate of Full Sail, graduated in the early 2000s sometime, and he is a senior music manager out at Sony Games. And he oversees the soundtracks for like The Last of Us, or Uncharted 4 is coming out right now. You probably might see commercials on every once in a while. What else? God of War series, Infamous, a lot of those Sony games has managed the overall soundtrack and dealing with multiple different composers or multiple artists at different sources. Now, direct audio artists. These are the content creators. These are the musicians, the sound designers. You have the music composers. Of course, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're focused on throughout the entire month. And as the music composer, you are ultimately responsible for the creation and production and recording and delivery of all of the finished music. So sometimes that means you manage all the sessions. Either that is entirely you in the box, producing and composing everything inside of your computer, or hiring and recording external musicians, or doing a full recording session. Typically, the budget for a game is often paid by minute of finished music. So you can budget things to say, okay, you need 10 minutes of music, or 30 minutes of music, or 2 hours, or 40 hours of music. 40 hours is a lot. 10 hours of music, or whatever it is. Your job would then to say, okay, how many minutes of music is that, and to create a piece of music and budget all this is, and that's not money that just goes in your pocket. That's studio time, hiring engineers, hiring musicians, instrument rental, buying instruments and technology and plugins and things like that for this particular game. All of that needs to be wrapped up into the budget from the client. Sound designers. Sound designers often work directly in-house because they have to work so closely with the animators and with the programmers. The sound designers have much more direct interaction with the game and game technology itself, meaning that the music is bounced out in the longer audio files. That is the finished composition. But footsteps and gunshots and car engines don't actually exist until somebody drives the car or shoots the weapon. And then it actually stitches a whole bunch of gunshots together and a whole car engine, recorded car engine sounds together to make those work. So sound design works directly, very, very closely with all of the technology. Audio programmers and implementers. These are the folks that are dealing with the code and the technology of hooking up all of your WAV files. So they take the music created by the composer and all of the sound effects created by the sound designer, and they hook it up with the game engine. And sometimes they get into the code, sometimes they get into scripts, sometimes they get into middleware like Fmod and Wise. They live somewhere in all of that, and they deal with hooking up all of the actual technology. It also gets into the mixing of the audio and music. Beyond the audio team, everybody else, of course, the audio team can be relatively small compared to a lot of the other teams. Artists, if there's 5 or 10 on the audio team in a game, there can easily be 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 or hundreds of artists that deal with 2D art and 3D art and animation and motion capture and all sorts of different disciplines. There's just so much. There's character art and level art and animations and particles and all sorts of different aspects to everything that you see. Programmers, those are the folks that take the actual code and render it all to happen. It is I kind of consider it a dark art, and it's just, I think though, they as a programmer are just as amazed as at our ability to write and compose a fully orchestrated song, as much as we are amazed at their ability to write code and get the computer to make an amazing game. So it's back and forth, but we also don't really speak the same language. The technical side and the creative side and being able to connect your ideas together may not be the most easy or direct thing. But they are your friends. They are the folks that actually make everything happen in the background. And then the QA and quality assurance team, these are the folks that break the game and find all of the bugs and find all of the issues, hopefully before it's released out to the public, even though the public find all sorts of issues also. But a QA team is a great place to start and get into the industry, because it allows you to get your hands on the games and to test the game. These people are testing the game, playing it over and over and over again, and trying to find any sort of issues or bugs, and then they send it back up the chain for somebody else to fix. So if you can get on a quality assurance team, this is a great entry-level position. And it is, if you can start working with the audio team, then when maybe there's an availability or an open position, they can hire from within. A question in the chat. I forgot when you said the Friday archive will be available. Well, I'll start converting it directly after class, and we'll see if I can get it uploaded. It's really the upload that takes the longest amount of time. But I will either send it out later tonight or... I do have lecture tomorrow, so it would probably be after lecture at about 11 or 11:30, and I can do it from Full Sail. So it will be available shortly. Game music implementation. This is going to get into some terminology and of the technology that is involved in the process of getting your music in the game. Implementation is... well, it says right there. Go back. I need to be using my mouse. Hold on. Game music implementation. It is how a real-time audio mix is created. It is the process of taking all of your individual WAV files and setting them up so that they play back correctly. How does the game know that you have intros and main loops and ending files? How does it know that you have 3 of them that they randomly switch around? It is telling the computer and setting all of that stuff up in the technology. Sort of like a mixing engineer takes hundreds of audio tracks and mixes them down into a final awesome 2-track stereo master. It is taking all of the music and sound effects for a game and putting them into software and making sure the right file plays at the right time. It sets up the interactive behavior for your music and sound effects. Which file plays, how long does it play for, does it loop, does it play back, does it randomize, are there multiple variations, does it mix and pan, does it add real-time effects? There's all sorts of stuff that the game can do to your audio beyond just in the DAW. So this is setting up the interactivity that's involved with the music. So we will talk about implementation through the course of the month, especially as we get into the second half where we start talking about the technology. Another term piece, or another term, some more terminology that I want to introduce is the idea of a game music system. Again, I'll be talking about music systems and game music systems quite a bit as we go through the month. And when I say game music system, I'm basically talking about the thing inside the game that plays the music back, right? It's not really anything in as much as it's just code inside of a computer, but there's something somewhere in the deep recesses of the code that knows that your WAV file is there, and if it's properly named, then it can look in that proper folder and pull out your WAV file and play it back. And so the music switches and changes and loops and rearranges itself in a particular way. And so that technology we typically label as a game music system. And it's what's known as a dynamic music system. Dynamic meaning that it changes. It reacts to the game, it reacts to the player and how the player moves through the game. So the opposite of a dynamic music system would be a static music system. Something that doesn't switch, it doesn't change. Just playing a WAV file, listening to music is a static music system. It just starts at the beginning, you hit play, it gets to the end, it stops, and that's it. But a dynamic music system switches and changes and loops according to what the player does. So a dynamic music system is kind of an umbrella term for a couple of different styles. We have adaptive, interactive, and generative music systems that will play back music in a different way depending on the game. So an adaptive music system reacts to the game world, reacts to the world around the player. Important is that the player does not have direct control at this point. The player is not doing anything that switches and changes the music. The music is reacting to something around the player. It's reacting to how much danger you're in, what your health is, what the score is, or how much time you have left in the game. what time of day is it, or how many enemies are nearby. Pretty much anything that you can think of, anything that you can come up with. If it's the game and the music is reacting to it, the music adapts to the game itself. So the player isn't doing anything to directly interact with the music, but it's switching and changing according to where they are or what they're doing. It's adapting the music. An interactive music system has the player directly controlling the music in some way. They click on something, or they hit a button and the music starts or stops. Very key in music games. If you have a Guitar Hero controller, or the drum set, or singing games or dancing games or anything like that, where the music is a direct component of the gameplay, the player is interacting with the music. If they have to do something, some action or some hit some button, that will turn on or off the music and play it back correctly. So music games, there's audio surf. There's a lot of, especially on iOS and Android, there's a lot of really cool music games where you're directly interacting with how it plays overall. And a generative music system. A generative music system has the music being created in real time by the computer. The computer is actually composing and writing the music in real time. And this is typically where the music composer goes, "Oh no, they don't need me anymore. The robots have taken over. Now the computer's just going to write the music. I'm out of a job at this point." But that's not completely the case, at least not yet. Where a computer, it's still very... Generative music systems are some of the oldest technology in game music, and it's still some of the most futuristic because we haven't gotten it right. You basically have to teach the computer to play music. And it's beyond just the written rules of music theory, because humans put so much into their music, so much performance and humanity into their music, that it becomes very noticeable very quickly when it's created by a computer that's just following a script overall. So this is basically telling the computer, all right, you have a drum kit, and you have kick, snare, and hi-hat. And you tell the computer, all right, you can play the kick drum on 1, 2, 3, and 4, but none of them back to back. Now with the snare drum, you can play on either the 2 of 4 or both of them. You can, with a hi-hat, you can do a quarter note pattern or an eighth note pattern or triplets. The bass line is going to be in this pentatonic scale. The chord progression is going to choose from these 10 chords, and your melody is going to be in this scale or this mode or key or whatever. And once you tell the computer the rules, then it's really just choosing notes out of a hat to play, and it gets to be a bit random, and it gets to be a bit robotic. So there are some games that have done some stuff successfully with it, and it allows for... It's like the difference between MIDI and WAV files, where MIDI is a very, very small file, but it's not really the music, it's the instructions to play the music. And a bounced WAV file is much, much larger in file size, but it's just playing back directly the audio. So generative music, there is no recorded audio. There's no fully recorded audio. It's individual samples that are triggered back. So it'll be interesting to see if this really takes off in any new direction. And there have been some very cool stuff, especially on iOS devices, where they've had some success. Like there's a game called Peggle. It's very popular amongst the game musicians in its success of creating more generative music. And our last topic here, the game development production cycle. This is the steps that a game goes through through its development. And we're going to put it in terms of something you should probably already be familiar with, the idea of pre-production, production, and post-production. You've probably heard of post-production quite a bit in film and television, and pre-production in songwriting and recording. And we're going to try to make that work for games. It doesn't work as easily for games. Games have a little bit different structure, but we're going to force it into those categories to make some comparisons into stuff that we already know. So pre-production, if you're recording an album, pre-production is the songwriting, the rehearsal, production is the recording session, and post-production is mixing and mastering. If you're doing a film, pre-production is script writing, rehearsal, casting, location scouting. Production is filming, and post-production is computer effects and sound design and music composition and mixing and getting the final product together. For games don't have an easy they have pre-production, they have production, they don't have much of a post-production, because it's not like you film the game and then you go edit it later, right? The game is just in production all the way through. There is no real post-production phase, but we'll kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So pre-production is they're hiring the teams, they're getting all their programmers and artists, and they may hire you at this point. They're purchasing all the equipment, technology, computers, everything that they need to do to build the game, and determining what are they going to build. Are we going to build a PlayStation game, an Xbox game, a Nintendo game, PC, Mac, iOS, Android? What technology, what platform are we going to build this for? They determine their schedules and their budgets and how long it's hopefully going to take to finish this. And they create a documentation of as much as they can describe about the game. This is the game we're actually going to be creating. You may not be hired at this step because there's really not much of a game at this point. But if you are hired as the music composer, then it's more of the conceptual stage. A lot of times you are hired and said, hey, we're going to make a zombie game, but it's going to take us like 6 months to even get any sort of game together. So go write us some zombie music. Go for the next 2 weeks. Go write an hour's worth of zombie music. Send it back to us, and we'll listen to that, and our music, your music will inspire our artists to make some zombies. So then you're hired for a little while, and then you go away, you work on another project, and they come back a little bit later and say, hey, we have a whole bunch of zombie game going on here. Why don't you write the rest of the music soundtrack for it? So at this point, you're conceptualizing, you're spotting, you're kind of figuring out, hey, maybe this fits here, maybe that we could do this awesome thing over here, over there. And it's really just in the idea phase. Production. The game mostly is in production. Games are notorious for growing and shrinking over time. They can just take out a character. They can add a whole new location, new part of the story. They don't have to go film it or re-record it or do anything like that. They can just make up new stuff. So this is where you are actually working hard on creating all of the music. This is mostly what you're doing. Generating all of the music. You're testing it out. Prototyping and play testing. This is... you will probably realize that you are not the person who actually puts the music in the game. So you have to send the music off to the client. They have to put it in the game and send it back to you. So there's often tools to test out everything to see that it works. And to make sure that everything's going to sound properly. You test out the game engine. You once you get finished approved music, it starts going into the game, and you just play the game over and over and over again to make sure everything is working properly. So if there was a post-production phase, you might be familiar with some of these topics here. The idea of alpha stage software or beta software. Probably have heard of beta software at some point, where games and audio software or just software in general goes into beta. You might be part of a beta test where it sends out to the public and you can try it out and see what the game's all about. Actually, I think Overwatch right now, which is really going to be probably a pretty popular game, is having a free beta where you can play the game. Is it on the Mac? Probably not, unfortunately. Anyway, alpha is the stage before beta. Alpha typically doesn't see the light of day. It doesn't go out to the public, but you send it out to all of the game publisher and the investors to say, hey, here's our game. It looks really good. Keep sending us money, and it will keep fixing it. So alpha is eventually they'll get one fully complete version of the game. It'll be full of bugs and it'll be crashing all over the place, but at least it'll be content, what they call content complete. It's all the levels, it's all the characters, it's all the art, it's all the sound and music, and now they got to go and make sure it all works. So eventually they'll go into beta where they release it out to the public. There's nothing better than the general public and the internet to totally destroy you and rip it all apart and tell you how horrible your game is and where it is breaking and where it needs to be fixed. Some things you just can't test on a massive scale. Like if your game is going to have millions of people playing online with money involved in all of that, there's typically a test process so they can try to make everything work. And lastly, there's the quality assurance team here again. These are the last folks that are testing the game. That are they won't tell you that your music is bad. They don't have that sort of control, but they'll tell you that your music is playing back incorrectly and it's not looping properly, or it stops at some point, or it has some issue at some part of the game. So it's not a very glamorous job, QA testing, but it's a great place to get into the industry. They typically have a high turnover because either people get hired on into the game team, or they just don't want to play video games for 10 hours a day for 6 days a week or something like that. So whatever the case is, but it's a great place to get your foot in the door overall. So that's a little bit much for me this afternoon. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up there, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the different jobs and roles and parts of the industry before we kind of get set into exactly what the music composer does and the whole process involved in that. So let's go ahead and stop there. Have a good weekend. Make sure you submit your assignments also for the peer review and feedback, so that we can have some things to talk about on Wednesday when we get everything set back up. All right, thanks a lot, and have a good afternoon.